So some of you may recognize that commercial. I think it was last year that really was played sort of nonstop. One of my favorite Nike commercials, and it's obviously longer than that. That was just a snippet. But what you heard was Matt Scott, who is part of the Wheelchair Basketball League, plays for the Warhawks, listing dozens of excuses for why people don't train, for why people don't complete assignments, for why people aren't able to do something. And then at the end, obviously, you realize that he is a person who probably had every excuse in the world to not make something of his life, to not achieve all that he could, and yet here he is playing in a professional wheelchair basketball league. Now I know that's basketball, and today's Super Bowl Sunday, so let's talk football. Let's talk football. It is Super Bowl Sunday, and tonight we have the fortune or misfortune, however your team preferences lie, of watching the Broncos and the the Ravens. Pardon me. The Ravens and the San Francisco 49ers. I say Broncos because when it was the Broncos-Ravens, we witnessed one of the most historic football games ever. And for anybody who didn't get to see it, I'm sorry. It was a great game. And obviously, for those of you who saw it and those of you who maybe didn't, the Broncos were leading with 1 minute left on the clock, and the Ravens had about 80 yards to drive in order to tie the score, and they did it on 2 plays or 3 plays, ending with a 70-yard touchdown pass that tied the score, took the game into overtime, and the Ravens prevailed in double overtime. And I was thinking back, and unfortunately for Raheem Moore, who was the safety who, as the analyst said, blew the coverage worse than any safety they've ever seen. That clip was shown over and over and over and over again, and I'm sure he's watched it far too many times. But the one thing is, when they interviewed him, when they brought him before the media, and the media started questioning him, he said, "I screwed up. I made a terrible error. I owe the city of Denver more, and this was my fault." He didn't say, "I misunderstood the play call. They told me a different play. He's faster than I thought he was." Nothing. He said, "I screwed up. I did not do my job as well as I could have." No excuses. And then Peyton Manning got up, and he said, "We, as a team, did not play well. We didn't handle the ball well." He said, "I did not play as well as I could have." He said, "I put my team in a position where our defense had to make a stand, and I should never, as a quarterback, be relying on my defense to win the game." And I think that's incredible. Peyton essentially had won that game. With a minute left, the Broncos were going to the Super Bowl. And yet he didn't point his finger and say, "We would have won, but he screwed up. We would have won, but he really blew that coverage." No, he said, "I didn't put us in enough position to win." When I was growing up, my mom was big on no excuses. My mom babysat for 23 years, roughly the first 19 years of my life. And so there were always lots of kids running around. And I can remember countless times a kid running in and saying, "She pushed me. She pushed me." And my mom would go and find the other kid and say, Did you push her?" And the girl would say, "But she wouldn't this," or "She wouldn't let me color with her. She didn't want to be my friend." And my mom would say, "Did you push her?" "Well, yes, but she..." There is no but. Did you push her? No excuses. you were accountable, and these were 2- and 3-year-olds, you were accountable for your actions. I grew up accountable for my actions. When I was in high school, I got my license, and about 2 weeks after I had my license, we had our finals, and so we had a half day, and it had started snowing. And again, I'm a very new driver. So we finished finals, and it's snowing, and we're getting out early, and I had 2 friends who said, "We don't want to ride the bus home." They're brothers. "Can you give us a ride home?" Now, my mom had told me that I was not to be driving anybody. My mom had told me I was not to be driving in the snow, and that after school I was to have come straight home. Well, I was a nice guy in high school, so I said, "Sure, I can drive you home. That's no problem. Nobody likes riding the bus." So I loaded them in my car and drove them home, and when I arrived home 20 minutes later than I should have, my mom said, "Where were you?" And she's not here right now, but I've rarely lied to my mom. She just always sort of knew. And I said, "Mom, it's okay. My Jeep has 4-wheel drive. I took these guys home from school." I was in trouble. And it wasn't because my mom didn't say, "David, you're too young to be driving in the snow. David, you're too young to be taking kids home. You're too young to be driving these other kids." She said, "You're old enough to know better. You're old enough to know that you aren't an experienced driver. You're old enough to know that they could have ridden the bus. You're old enough to know that I told you not to do this. You're responsible for your actions." With my parents, we never had the excuse of "we're too young" or "well, I didn't know better," because my mom and my dad made sure that we always knew better. I started a paper route at 10 years old, which was actually 6 months before I was legally allowed to run a paper route, but it was in my sister's name. She had gotten it as a job, thought it would be fun, and then her friends saw her delivering newspapers before school, and it was no longer fun. So I took over, and I had that paper route until I was 18, until I graduated. So I had that responsibility, and if I didn't get the papers out in time, my parents didn't say, "Oh, it's okay, you're 10. It was, "You know you'd have to do this route earlier. You know how to do it. You're old enough to know better." One thing I stressed with our high schoolers last year, we talked about teens and especially Bethany Hamilton, who we watched in a video last year or 2 years ago, who is in the movie Soul Surfer. She's a professional surfer who, when she was 13, had her arm bitten off in a shark attack, and now continues to professionally surf. She worked her way back, and she also is a motivational speaker and speaks a lot sharing the gospel. And then the other one was Zach Hunter, who in 7th grade, they studied slavery, and he was doing a research project and found out that there's still slavery in the world. And so in 7th grade, he started the program Loose Change to Loosen Chains, and he's now, I believe, 19 or 20. He's been traveling around the world speaking on behalf of this program and other programs that he's helped start, trying to abolish slavery all over the world. As people, we're always looking for that excuse. We're always looking for, we aren't good enough. We don't have enough money. I don't have enough money. I would help, but I really promised somebody else I would do this. I'm not able. I'm too young. But they're all excuses. And there's a cliche statement about excuses, but I can't say it here in church. And we find in Jeremiah, in the first reading, God explicitly says, or he says to Jeremiah, "Do not say I am just a boy." Jeremiah said, "You can't use me, I'm only a boy." And God said, "Do not say I'm just a boy, or you're just a boy. I put a call on your life. I knew you before you were born, and I made sure that you had the skills, that you had the ability to help other people. When we look at the feeding of the 5,000, which was our gospel lesson today, I keep picturing Jesus sort of in The Office, the TV show scenario where people are following him, and he says, how are we going to feed all these people? How are we going to buy bread for all these people? And that's when I picture it cutting away to him sitting in the conference room going, I know how we're going to feed all these people. And then jumping back out as everybody else in the office is trying to scramble around and say, but Jesus, we don't have enough money. We could never afford to feed all these people. There is no way that we could feed all these people. We can't do it. There's no try. It's immediately jumping to, shouldn't they be responsible for feeding themselves? We aren't capable of doing it. And Jesus, it says right in there, it says, he asked them this because he already knew what he was going to do. He already knew that there was going to be a boy approaching him with these 5 loaves of bread and these 2 fish. He already knew that he was going to be able to feed everybody gathered there, 5,000 people, with those 5 loaves and those 2 fish. But Jesus didn't want to point to the boy and say, go to him, here's what I'm going to do, I'll break the bread and feed everybody. And he waited for him to approach him. The disciples show up and they say, Jesus, we have this boy here, and I think that's great too. We have this boy. And I just picture that boy sitting there with his parents looking around at all the people going, well, I'm hungry. I bet they're all hungry. What's going to happen? And I picture his parents, if they were anything like my parents, saying, well, you have food, we have food. Go see if you can help. Go see if, just say, Jesus might not be able to say anything. He might not be able to do anything with these 5 loaves and these 2 fish. He might say, thanks for the offer, but we need more. But it's never worth it's not worth not trying. Go ask. They didn't tell him, let me do it. You're just a boy. Jesus is going to laugh at you. Ha ha ha. They didn't say, just sit here, you're too young. The boy said, we have this, and they said, go ahead, go see what he can do. You're old enough. That's a great idea. And so the disciples approach Jesus, and they say, we have a boy here who has this food, but it's not enough. Here they still don't believe, and not that they don't believe in the food, the amount of food. I keep thinking they don't believe in the boy. They don't believe in, they say, sort of right out there, there's a boy here. There's a boy, not there's a person or we've found this much. There's a boy here with this much. And I think they're sort of trying to woo him. Oh, yeah, sure, boy, we'll help you out. Yeah, you come with us. We'll go to Jesus. We'll see what he can do. And I think about our teens at our church, and again, I press them to realize that they aren't too young, that they aren't too weak, they aren't too unimportant or unnoticeable to do anything. They are actually, when we think of the leaders of the world, when we think of people, a lot of times now we think he's too old to make a difference. A lot of people think we need to start with our younger generations and build them up. And so that's where, with our teens, I push them to try. And with the adults, I say, push the teens to try. Push them to say, go to Jesus. Go see what you can do with this. When they come to us with an idea, when they come to us and say, can I help? Say, yes, why don't you try doing this? Why don't you try doing this? And for the adults, that doesn't mean that we don't have to do anything. That means that we guide them, we lead them, and we help, and we do our part. And we saw it Super Bowl Sunday, and as Pastor Dave said, there's thousands and thousands of churches and school groups and other groups all over this nation this weekend celebrating the Super Bowl of Caring. And so we bring our food, and we know that our church is not going to end hunger, and our church is not going to even end hunger in Gaithersburg. But we bring our food because we know that when we bring that food, then other people see us bringing that food and they bring that food. And when we combine it with all that food, we can make a dent in that hunger. Just 2 weeks ago, we were at the high school retreat in Camp Nawaqua, up in Camp Nawaqua in Pennsylvania. And the high schoolers had the opportunity of working at the Adams County Rescue Mission. And they are actually, for the whole state of Pennsylvania, one of the biggest recyclers in the whole state. They're ranked number 1, and they are private. They do their own. And what they do is they're also a homeless shelter. And the men who live there work. And that's how they work and they eat and they help sell things in the thrift store that they have, and they have all these recycling programs. And they also give them training. And so it's sort of a self-running entity. And what we found out was in the thrift store, they had a problem a couple weeks ago. Bruce Dietrich, who runs it, he was telling us, the board came to him and said, we need to give away more clothes. We have way too many clothes here. We can't use it all. And Bruce looked at him and said, last week alone, we gave away over 500 pieces of clothing. See, at the rescue mission, if you can't afford to buy it, they give it to you. And he said, it's not that we aren't giving away enough. It's that the more we give away, the more comes back to us. God sees that we are working here. God sees that we are joining together, and He brings us a surplus. And so I think that's our lesson, and I hope they picked up on that, and if they didn't, they just heard it again. But I think that's our lesson, in that God wants us to work. He's not going to come to us. He wants us to meet Him halfway. He knows already He's going to use our 5 loaves and our 2 fish. He knows that. But He's not going to seek us out of the crowd of 5,000. He wants us to take those steps towards Him and say, God, here's what I have. Can you use it? Jesus, here's what I have. Can you multiply this to help people? And the answer is always going to be yes. Amen.